Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to Timeless Romance Tales. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more dark aristocratic romance, dangerous bargains, and stories where love is forged under impossible choices. Now let's begin. The first thing the crown took from her was choice, the second was silence, and the third was everything she loved. Margaret Vale stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Privy Office, hands folded neatly at her waist, heart beating far too loudly for a room so quiet. The windows were tall and narrow, designed to let in light without mercy. There was nowhere to hide here, no shadow deep enough to disappear into. Across from her, Lord Chancellor Whitcomb studied a parchment as though it bored him. "You understand why you're here?" he said at last. Margaret lifted her chin. "I was summoned." A thin smile curved his mouth. "Summoned is such a polite word. I prefer required." Her fingers tightened. Whitcomb finally looked at her. "Your father's debts have grown inconvenient. Your brother's name appears in ledgers he cannot explain. And your younger sister has been accepted into a school funded entirely by the crown." Margaret's breath caught. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," he replied smoothly. He rose and crossed the room, stopping far too close. "You will travel to Blackmere Estate," he continued. "You will reside there as a guest. And you will observe the Duke of Blackmere." Margaret knew the name. Everyone did. Duke Alastair Rowan. Cold, brilliant, untouchable. A man whose loyalty to the crown had recently come into question. "You believe he's a traitor," Margaret said. "We believe he's careful," Whitcomb corrected. "And careful men are dangerous." She swallowed. "And you want me to?" "Listen," he said. "Watch. Report. And if I refuse?" Whitcomb's gaze hardened. "Then your father will be arrested. Your brother will disappear into a prison that does not keep records. And your sister will be returned home disgraced." Margaret closed her eyes. The crown did not ask. It collected. "I'll go," she said quietly. Whitcomb smiled again. "Good. You leave at dawn." Blackmere Estate rose from the countryside like something ancient and deliberate. Stone walls weathered by centuries. Iron gates that did not creak because they did not need to announce themselves. Margaret arrived under the guise of a distant relation seeking quiet refuge. A believable lie. A convenient one. The Duke met her in the entry hall. Alastair Rowan was taller than she expected. Broad-shouldered, dressed in dark riding clothes rather than court finery. His presence calm but alert, like a man who noticed everything and revealed nothing. "Miss Vale," he said evenly. "Welcome to Blackmere. Thank you for receiving me, Your Grace." "You were recommended as unobtrusive," he replied. "I value that." The words felt like a warning. From the first day, Margaret observed. She memorized his routines, noted the guests he received, the letters delivered under seal, the servants who came and went. But the Duke did not behave like a traitor. He rose early, worked late, reviewed crown correspondence meticulously, paid his staff generously, dismissed gossip with a glance. "You're very quiet," he remarked one evening as they dined alone. "I was taught not to waste words," Margaret replied. "By whom?" "By necessity." Something unreadable crossed his face. "You may speak freely here," he said. She smiled faintly. "Freedom is relative." Her first report to the crown was sparse. "The Duke conducts himself with discipline. No overt disloyalty observed." The reply came 2 days later. "Look harder." So she did. She lingered near doors, asked gentle questions, watched him in council with visiting nobles. Nothing. Until one afternoon, when she wandered into the West Wing by mistake. The room she entered was not a study. It was an accounting chamber. Ledgers covered every surface. Names. Numbers. Columns of red ink that made her stomach tighten. She recognized some of them. Her father's merchant house. Her brother's debts. Her sister's school fees. Her pulse thundered. These were not records of corruption. They were records of protection. That evening she confronted him. "You're paying debts that aren't yours," she said quietly as they stood in the library. Alastair did not look up from his book. "Am I?" "My family's debts," she pressed. "They've been resolved." Silence. Then he closed the book. How long? He asked calmly. Have you been spying on me? Her breath caught. You observe too carefully, he continued. You write letters too often. And you never ask for anything. She stiffened. You knew. I suspected, he said. The crown grows impatient. Her voice trembled. They threatened my family. He studied her for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. They would. Margaret's chest ached. Then why help us? Alistair stepped closer. Because, he said, your father once saved my life. She stared at him. He never spoke of it. He wasn't meant to, Alistair replied. He transported supplies through a blocked pass during the war. Took a risk that allowed my regiment to survive. Her eyes burned. So you've been protecting us? Yes. And letting the crown believe you disloyal? I let them believe what they want, he said. It keeps their eyes where I can see them. Her voice broke. They sent me to destroy you. And instead, he said softly, you learned the truth. Tears slipped free despite her restraint. What do I do now? Alistair's gaze hardened. Now, he said, you choose. The crown's next letter arrived sealed in black. We require proof. Margaret stared at the words until they blurred. That night, she told Alistair everything. They want something tangible, she said. A document. Confession. Anything that implicates you. And if you fail, they'll take my family. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, they won't. She shook her head. You don't understand how ruthless they are. I understand perfectly, he replied. That's why we end this. How? I give them what they want, he said. Her breath left her in a rush. No. A lie, he clarified. One crafted carefully enough to collapse under scrutiny. They'll investigate. Yes, he said. And in doing so, expose their own manipulation. She stared at him. That would destroy them. It would humble them, he corrected. And you? She asked. His jaw tightened. It will cost me. Her voice dropped. I won't be the reason. You already are, he said gently. But not in the way you fear. He reached into his desk and withdrew a document. A marriage contract, he said. Her heart stuttered. What? The crown cannot compel testimony from a duchess without public cause, he continued. And they cannot threaten a family protected by ducal alliance. She shook her head. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You didn't betray me when you had reason to. And you came to me instead of them. Her hands trembled. This is blackmail. No, he said quietly. It's sanctuary. The wedding was announced 3 days later. The court was stunned. The Duke of Blackmere had married quietly, without permission, to a woman no one had bothered to notice. The crown summoned him at once. Margaret stood beside him in court, spine straight, hands steady. You were sent to spy, Wickham accused coldly. And instead you married your target. Margaret met his gaze. I married my protector. Wickham sneered. You expect us to believe this is love? Alistair spoke then, his voice calm but unyielding. No, he said. You are to believe this is law. Silence fell. The crown backed down, not gracefully but decisively. The crown retreated publicly. Privately, it circled like a wounded animal. For weeks after the confrontation, Margaret felt the tension tighten rather than ease. Letters arrived at Blackmere under unfamiliar seals. Courtiers appeared in the countryside on hunting trips that took them far too close to the estate. Once, she noticed a rider watching the gates from the tree line before disappearing at dusk. They're waiting, she said one evening as she and Alistair reviewed correspondence in his study. They always do, he replied calmly. The crown believes patience is a virtue. In truth, it's a weapon. And you? She asked quietly. What do you believe? Alistair leaned back in his chair, studying her not as a strategist, but as a man measuring truth. I believe, he said slowly, that they underestimated you. Margaret's brow furrowed. Me. You, he repeated. They thought you would break, or betray, or cling to survival at any cost. She swallowed. I nearly did. But you didn't, he said. You chose confrontation over silence. The words settled heavily in her chest. That night, sleep eluded her. She found herself wandering the halls until she reached the small chapel tucked into the eastern wing. Unused, quiet, forgotten by most of the household. Candlelight flickered weakly against stone walls. Alistair was already there. He stood before the altar, hands clasped behind his back, expression distant. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. "You aren't," he replied. "I come here when the weight becomes loud." She stepped closer. "Does it still feel like sacrifice?" He turned to her then. "Every day." Margaret's voice trembled. "And me." "You," he said, "are the part one don't regret." The confession stole her breath. "This marriage began as protection," she said. "As strategy." "Yes. But now," she pressed. Alistair hesitated just a fraction. "Now," he admitted, "it feels like trust. And trust is far more dangerous than secrecy." Her chest tightened. "I don't want to be your vulnerability." He stepped closer. "You already are. The difference is, I chose it." Emotion rose sharp and sudden, catching her off guard. "I've spent my life being useful," she said quietly. "Never chosen. Never defended unless it served someone else." His hand lifted, paused, then gently cupped her cheek. "Then let me be the first," he said. "Not because it serves me, but because I want you safe." She leaned into his touch without thinking. The moment was not fiery. It was steady, grounding. The Crown made one final attempt. A formal summons arrived, requesting Margaret alone. Alistair read it once, then tore it in half. "They won't separate us," he said flatly. "And if they try?" she asked. "Then they will do so publicly," he replied. "And that is something they fear." Still, the danger lingered like a shadow. It was Margaret who finally made the decision. "We stop waiting," she said one morning. "We don't hide. We don't retreat." Alistair studied her. "You want to confront them again." "I want to remind them," she said steadily, "that I am no longer a tool they can wield." The appearance was subtle but deliberate. A charity gala in the capital. Margaret entered at Alistair's side. Not behind him, not clinging, but equal in step. Whispers followed them through the hall, but none dared approach too closely. Whitcomb watched from across the room, his smile tight. "You seem confident," he remarked when Alistair paused beside him. "I am," Margaret replied before her husband could speak. "Confidence is what remains when threats fail." Whitcomb's gaze hardened. "You think marriage shields you?" "No," she said calmly. "Truth does." And for the first time he had no response. That night, back at Blackmere, Margaret stood on the terrace, breathing in the cool air. "You ended this," Alistair said quietly as he joined her. She shook her head. "We did." Silence settled, comfortable, earned. "You were sent to spy on me," he said at last. "And you were meant to be my downfall," she replied. He turned to her, eyes dark with something unguarded. "Instead," he said, "you became my anchor." She smiled faintly. "And you became my shelter." This time when he kissed her there was no hesitation. No calculation. Only choice. Love did not arrive like a blaze. It arrived like standing beside someone who had seen your worst fear, and chosen to protect you anyway. Margaret Vale had been sent to betray a duke. Instead she exposed a crown that mistook control for power. And in choosing him, she chose herself.